I don't want to. Okay, so welcome to today's video lab. Today's lab, I want to cover Bootstrap. So I have a lecture on Bootstrap already that you should watch. I have a quiz that you can take just to evaluate your aptitude of it, and you have unlimited attempts on that quiz. So today I want to use Bootstrap to build out a portfolio site. So we're going to use Bootstrap 5. Okay, so let's see here. Let's cover our table of contents.
Excuse me.
The first thing we're going to do is introduce the core concepts of what Bootstrap is and what problems it solves for us. And then we'll go into goal 0, where we'll talk about designing an online portfolio and just basic advice for what you might want to consider when you design your own portfolio and why you might want to have a portfolio. And then we'll build out each of the pages in our portfolio across this lab. So we'll have a landing page, which will be essentially the initial page that a user would get directed to. Then we'll have a contact page, which is going to be a page with inputs that a user will be able to go ahead and send you a message. Then for goal 3, we're going to build a projects page, which is going to consist of Bootstrap cards and card groups. So that'll be where you can show off all the projects that you've built. So that'll be a portfolio of sorts. Then our goal 4 will be to have a blog page that can have articles about anything you want to write about, and that'll make use of a carousel. Then we'll have an about page, which will essentially have all of your skills and talents and things like that. And then finally, we'll go ahead and add in a nav bar to our pages so we can easily hop from one to the other using the consistent kind of UI element at the top. And then we'll make some concluding notes and kind of just talk about how you might want to create your own portfolio after that. Okay, after going through the introduction, let's go through, the table of contents, let's go through the introduction. So our prereqs for this lab is, well, there's not much. We just need to have a Chrome browser, some kind of code editor, same as the other labs, and it would help if you knew what HTML was. The motivation behind this lab is we want to learn how to use Bootstrap to quickly prototype a responsive web design. And so our goal is to build a portfolio page, like I mentioned in the table of contents, where we can share information about who we are and what our skills are. And so the learning objectives that you should come away with after completing this lab will be to learn how to import Bootstrap into an HTML document, how you can use Bootstrap for all of your styling needs. So the nice thing about Bootstrap is instead of having to implement CSS files from scratch, Bootstrap is effectively predefined CSS files that have predefined names, and we can just use those names to style like colors or our text or provide spacing. We'll also learn how to use Bootstrap for aligning things like rows and columns and that flex, the flex space. We'll talk about how we can use Bootstrap to create card components and card groups, how we can make carousels with indicators and controls, and finally, how to have a nice fancy nav bar that will collapse and, again, be responsive. I'll talk about what it means to have responsive web design in just a moment. Let's cover the project architecture. So our project's going to be a portfolio folder. Inside the portfolio folder is where we're going to put all of our HTML files. We'll have a host of subfolders. One will hold all of our blog articles. So inside of articles will be other HTML files that are not part of the actual portfolio site, but they'd be pages you add to it. We'll have an assets directory that's going to have all the images we need for this lab. We'll have a scripts directory that has a Bootstrap dependency. So there is one JavaScript Bootstrap file we have to include that gives us some kind of interactive components like carousels and collapsible buttons and whatnot. So in order to update the DOM in our viewport, we need those JS files. And then we have these predefined CSS files, bootstrap-icons and bootstrap.min, so minimize Bootstrap. Okay, so let's grab that. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to copy that link. I'll go over here, paste it, and boop. Okay, I now have that. Okay, So now moving forward. So Bootstrap, what is it really? It's a styling framework or a library. You can use it to quickly design and customize responsive mobile-first sites. It's the
Thank
most
you.
popular front-end open source toolkit. It gives us what's called a responsive grid system. So we talk about responsiveness here, but really what we'll be able to do with it is apply colors. It has icons that are free, components, which we're going to learn about in just a moment. When we start building out our thing, we're going to be able to align our elements across a grid. So we want to think about laying out our web content in a grid-based approach. And let's see. And when we talk about something that's responsive, just understand that our web pages are usually viewed on two different device type display ports. One is typically in landscape mode. The other is in portrait mode. Let me just make sure. If you're not muted, please go ahead and mute yourself. Mute and mute. Okay, perfect. So let me grab this so I can easily see. Don't need participants. Okay, perfect. Okay. So the big thing about responsive web design is like we're all looking at my display right now, which is on a laptop. So it's in a landscape mode, right? Which means that my width is greater than my height. If you're using your phone to view a web page, it's probably going to be in a portrait mode. It means that the height is going to be greater than the width. When you design a web page, you want it to be responsive, so it looks professional, it looks good, whether it's in a landscape mode or a portrait mode. That's a non-trivial thing to ask. That was a big complication when phones were really becoming much more popular with internet access in 2006. And so Bootstrap helps provide these responsive stylings for us. If you want some good examples of what a portfolio page looks like, I provide some here. We might look at some of these after the lab if we have time. Okay, let's move to goal 0. Let's talk about what it takes to design an online portfolio. So again, our motivation is to build a portfolio, and the goal of a portfolio is to share any information about yourself and your skills with the general public. You can think of it as your domain on the internet. It's like your internet house. So anything and everything that you create, you should share on your portfolio. And that can include things that are non-technical. So if you do creative writing, if you do any kind of musical compositions, if you do art illustrations, again, since we're all computer science students here or interested in computer science, we should share all of our coding projects. But you should consider also doing like some articles, and they could be blog articles like tech articles, or they could, if you write music, maybe it could be about creating music, but it just gives you an insight into who you are. So with that said, the first thing we want to do is determine the categories or sections of the content of our portfolio. In this lab, we're going to create a landing section, which is going to serve as the introduction of your portfolio, and it should draw a visitor's attention and highlight any important information or news. So that's going to be the goal of the landing page. Each of your sections should have a goal. The goal of the projects page is to contain information related to all of your coding projects with links to the source code, to either GitHub, or links to online demos. Inside of the blog section, it should contain articles that are written by you regarding topics you're interested in. Ideally, your projects for your project section should all have a companion article discussing your motivation and approaches for their design and implementation. In other words, we call that a developer diary. The About section should contain personal information about you and your skills, and then a contact page that allows an interested party to be able to reach out and get in touch with you. So again, the role of a portfolio page is potentially share what you do so that you can find other people interested in it, either as partners or as employers. So now that we know kind of the basic layout, why don't we start building? So goal 1, let's build the initial landing page. So our portfolio needs a place for users to initially go to. We'll create an HTML file. We'll name it index.html, and we will go ahead and put that in our portfolio folder. So the first thing I need to do is get that portfolio folder. Let me get that zip file that I have. Paste it in here. Let me unzip. Okay. And let me change the name of this to be portfolio. Perfect. Okay. So here, again, I have articles. I already have 2 articles that are pre-made. I have some assets. I have my script, and I have my style. So now all I need to do is, okay, where am I inside my terminal? Okay, so let me go into portfolio. Excellent. And let me create a index.html page. Excellent. So now I'll grab that. I'll bring it into, wait a second. I need my text editor. I'll grab that, bring it in here. But you know what? Let's also drag it in here too. Okay, so I have it opened in my browser and I have it opened up in my text editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and define our, let's do this. Okay, let's create some HTML, and then we're going to grab the head. So let's paste the, oh, not quite what I wanted there, but we will just go ahead and delete. Excellent. And tab that over. Okay, so here we're going to have a link that gives us a favicon, and that's going to insert the favicon.png. So we've seen that before. We're going to create a title that will appear in our tab. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to set some metadata in our head for our browser. We'll make sure that the character set that we use inside the HTML will be UTF-8. And we will also go ahead and set some metadata that will effectively be able to set the viewport behaviors. So for the viewport, we'll go ahead and set the width to be the device width and have an initial scale value of 1. And then after that, I'm just going to link these CSS files. And notice we're linking them as style sheets. And this looks no different than if we were to link our own CSS files, only these are pre-authored for us. So at this stage, if I go and refresh, I'll see I get that favicon, I get this your name, which is the title, which is of course right there. And then the rest of the stuff is just preloaded, but it's not doing anything yet. It's not part of the body. So now that we have that, let's go to step 2, where we actually set up our HTML body with all its elements and link our Bootstrap JS file. So we link our CSS files inside of the head, but we're going to link our JS files after all of our HTML elements, because the JS files potentially need to be able to reference the HTML elements to modify them. So they therefore have to come after, so that the HTML elements actually exist, so they can be modified if necessary. So what are we doing here on our landing page? Let's take a look. So on our body tags, we're going to have an image that's going to have the source of a background image, and then we're going to do a div tag. So that is a block level element. So the div goes from here to here. Inside of there, I'll have a heading element that says "Hello World." I'll have a paragraph element that'll give me some text about what this page is. I'll have a nested div tag here that will then group up some buttons. I have a button that will link to projects.html, a button that will link to blog.html, a button that will link to about.html, and a button that will link to contact.html. And notice what we're doing here is we're just setting up an on-click event that then just brings us to document.location, and then essentially changes our location address in our hyper inside of our address bar, URL bar. And again, the button will say code, blog, about, and contact, right? That's between the head and closing tags of our button. And then after that, after we've essentially made the contents of the page, we will link with a script tag this external JS file that is inside this scripts right here. Perfect. So if there's no questions there, let's see what we currently have. So if I refresh, there it is. So that's my image. And then underneath my image will be "Hello World," and then the paragraph, and then all these buttons. And if I click on the button, That doesn't exist yet, so it's going to take me to a new page, though, right? Like blog.html. Perfect. Okay, so let's start applying some Bootstrap so that we can actually get some styles going on here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to use some Bootstrap classes so that we can get a full-size background image and some white text on the foreground. So here, I'm going to start modifying the code that's already there. What's highlighted yellow is what I'm going to add into my landing page to actually get some of these styles applied. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go into the image tag here and apply some class names. Let's find that here. So that's our image here. Let's apply this class. So here I'm going to apply the class of position absolute. And I'm going to do a width of 100 and a height 100. So let's start by just doing the width 100 and height 100. What you're probably going to see, what you can guess, is it's going to stretch the image out. It's going to so that it covers the entire width and the entire height of our viewport. So now underneath that is going to be our text. Okay. So just as easy. So just by classing class names in our HTML, we're starting to get CSS stylings. That's the power of Bootstrap. Now we're going to apply this position-absolute. Let's see what happens when I go ahead and apply that. Okay. So now let me go back. So now that I have the position absolute, I can't scroll down anymore. We'll talk about what's actually happening there in just a moment. And right here, so your position absolute. So your default behavior for your position of HTML elements is a relative. So it's relative to other HTML elements. And everything with a relative position essentially has a Z index inside of our viewport. And so relative position HTML will allow you to, they take into account each other, and they'll evaluate the C index. So even if you don't give a Z index manually to an HTML element, it gets one automatically, unless it's defined with an absolute position. Absolute position removes an element from the flow of elements on a page, and now that element will be unaffected by other HTML elements, and it doesn't affect other elements. So it like turns it into a ghost of sorts. I don't know if there's another better way to explain that. So if we want to get our other elements back, right? So if we want to treat this background image in a way that it doesn't affect our div tag here. So if we want to treat this as a background and remove it from the flow of HTML elements, we can set that to absolute. And then we predefine all the other things inside this div as being relative. So let's do that so that it's given a Z index. And by giving a Z index, it will now render on top and not interact with our background. And so now notice at the very top here, where you would normally be rendering the image, we're instead rendering our text. So again, by having a position of absolute, it was removed from essentially the flow of elements that get rendered to the viewport. So it's put in the background, but still there. And then at the very top, we'll have now our heading and this paragraph and this collection. And notice, let's see what else we did here. In addition to setting our class to position relative, we also gave it another class name, text white, and that cascaded down to everything inside the div. So the heading, the paragraph, everything now has the color of white. Perfect. And yep, that's what we look like there. And so the next thing I want to do here for my landing page is I want to use the Bootstrap class to go ahead and get some horizontal centering. So in order to center anything, it has to be in a container. So everything should be contained, should be defined inside of a container on Bootstrap. That's why I have this div class. That div class will be my container that contains all my other HTML documents. So let's go back here. So in addition to establishing that all these HTML documents will have a relative position and it will have white text, I will also use the name container so that it will be defined. I won't be rendering directly like right on the side of my viewport. And now I can also apply text centering, so I center everything. And just like that, perfect. So now everything is centered. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to also go ahead and use Bootstrap Classes to be able to achieve a vertical centering. So again, what I'll do is I'll highlight this yellow text here, and I'll add that into this div class, which contains all of my styles. So again, white text, this is a container, which now allows us to center our text. And we also will set our height to 100. Just like what we did with our image. So we know what that does. We're going to use the display of flex. We saw what the flex display was last lecture or last lab. We want to flex as a column, and we want to justify the content to the center. So let's save this, and there we go. So now our landing page has horizontally and vertically aligned our content. And here, if I go and change the viewport, you'll see it maintains the styling. So it's very responsive. Okay, perfect. So let me make it a little bit easier on myself. That way I can get back to the code. Okay, so what does some of this stuff mean? Well, I tried to go ahead and inside the lab give explainers for each of these things as you walk through it. So again, H100 just sets the element's height to 100%. Deflex sets the flex block container. Flex column sets the flex direction into columns, i.e. vertically, as opposed to rows, which would be horizontal for our flex space. And then we're going to justify the content so that it's centered. And that just vertically centers the content in our container. Perfect. And then the last thing we kind of want to do here, is that the last thing? No, I want to add icons too. But the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to adjust our heading font, and I want to adjust our button styles. So the first thing I'm going to do to adjust our font is I'm going to add a class to my heading. So let's go back here. Let's go and find our heading 1 element that says hello world. And I'm going to apply a class name of display-4. So that's a different type of font. And there it is. Okay, so that's a nicer kind of font that really draws the attention of the eye. That's built into Bootstrap. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and get a different styling for our buttons. So let's go to each one of our buttons here. And I'll apply this. So the first thing I'm going to do is let me just do BTN. So that will style the button. So right now we have the default style of the button. This first one now has now been styled, but notice it doesn't have a color. We'd have to apply a color to it. The color I want to apply to it is going to be an outline color that's light. And so that'll be a white outline around the button. So I'll do a second class name so I can go ahead and get my button to look like that. Yeah, that way if I can still see the background image, and when I hover over it, it has an on hover effect. Very nice. So then I'll just copy this and I will paste that for each of my buttons. So all of my button elements will have that style. So now I want to come back over here. Oh yeah, I think that looks much, much nicer now. And now when we hover over each one of those, you get that on hover event. Perfect. And then the next thing that I want to do is add an icon into my buttons. So where I have, for instance, code, I might have an icon that represents coding, an icon that represents blogging, an icon that represents, hey, this is me, the thing that talks about me, and then finally an icon that represents getting in contact with me. I'm adding the icon so that you can see how we can add icons into our document using just pure Bootstrap. So here, inside of the button where I have the text code, for instance, I'm going to go ahead and create a new HTML element of type I. You can think of I for icon. We're going to give it the class of BI for Bootstrap icon, and then we're going to give it the name of the icon we want. So it's a Bootstrap icon -code/. And inside the lecture, I give a reference. So if inside the PowerPoint slides, I give a reference of all the different icons you could potentially use. So I would advocate you go look at the PowerPoint slides to see what your options are. So just looking at this one, let's see what we got here. Let's refresh. Yep. And so now we have that icon. Looks beautiful. Let's also go ahead and grab this one. So actually, let me just do this. We will add this one. And I have to print out here so I can reference it. Okay, so let's see. What was this? This was chat dots. So here, we'll make this chat dots. Okay, let's go into our about section. And let's make this one here a person. And then finally, for our contact, let us make that an envelope. Let's make sure all that is rendering the way we expect. Okay, yep, we have chat box, we have a person, we have an envelope. Okay, so now we have all these little icons that are also inside of our button, and all of that from Bootstrap. And yeah, so once I've done that, I'm pretty happy with this. It's super responsive. I can, again, pull and stretch it however I want, and click on these links, and they don't go anywhere yet, but I think this is a nice looking, attractive landing page. So then let's move on to the next goal. Now that we've built out our landing page, the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and build out a contact page. Our contact page, again, is going to be the page that we are going to send a user to be able to send us information. So it should be able to ask the user for their name, their email address, the subject of why they're contacting you, and maybe a message that can be sent to you. So here's a general mock-up of what we're looking to build. So let's actually do it. The first thing we should do is, well, let's create something that's called contact.html. So let me go over here and create that contact.html. Okay. Now let me go over here and drag that in here. And let me start by, no, don't do that. Okay, let me focus into here, HTML and HTML. Okay, we'll start by finding my HTML elements. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and define the head of my HTML document right here. Perfect. Okay, so what's happening inside the head? Again, we're going to use that same favicon. We're going to create a title that's going to have your name. We're going to set the character set to UTF-8, and we're going to set the viewport size. So just out of curiosity, if we were to remove these, let's go back, save that. One of the nice things about web development is you can always remove things and see how it affects. Notice some of this stuff is default, and it doesn't actually affect anything, right? Like we could still keep everything we use and omit that. However, these are some default settings, and we're adding little layers of complexity so we can enforce these into our viewport parsing. So some of this stuff you technically could do without because it's default settings, but I think it's valuable for you to actually see some of these declarations. Slowly kind of expand the complexity of what we're adding in here. And then what we're going to do here is we're also going to link our CSS files, our Bootstrap files. That's going to give us our styling based off of just using class names. And now let me grab this body. And this body doesn't have any styling yet, right? We haven't added any Bootstrap names yet. So let's just look at what the default values of our body. The last is always going to be a link of our script tags. And then we're going to have the div, which is going to represent our, well, at the very top, we'll have a nav bar, but we'll leave the nav bar empty for now. We'll fill that out as our last goal. In between our nav bar and the script tags that could potentially modify any HTML documents, we'll have a div tag that's going to be the container of all of the HTML elements that we're looking to represent our contact form with. So again, the topmost part of our form should be a heading element. We're going to use a icon of the envelope that says contact. Then we'll use a horizontal rule. Then we're going to create a form element. Inside of our form element, we're going to create a div tag that's going to cluster together. Remember, div tag creates a block element, allows us to have some children HTML that's brought together. It will have a label of a name and then an input type for text. And we'll have a placeholder inside of there that says name. We'll have another div that will have the label of email and then another input field of type email. And we'll call that, we'll give that a placeholder of email. We'll have another div tag that will have a label of subject and will be an input type of subject. And each of these will also give IDs, so we can access those at some point, name, email, and subject. Again, we'll give it a placeholder. And then finally, we'll have a div that is going to be a message. Here, this is going to be a text area that's going to be 4 rows large, and we'll give an ID of message. And again, a placeholder of message. So if I go and click on contact now, contact should exist, and it should just have this ugly HTML that has no styling yet. And notice when I was doing placeholder puts in name inside of the field here, email and subject. So that's what that placeholder attribute was doing. Okay. The next thing I want to do here is, well, why don't we start to apply some stylings? So inside the body, let me go inside of here. So inside of my body of my HTML, I'm going to set some class names. I'm going to set the BD-dark, so the background to dark, and then the text to light. So the moment I do that, I can now see I've inverted the colors. So it's, now let's go ahead and actually use Bootstrap's styling for forms on each of our form containers. So let me go here. And so inside this div, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different divs inside of this form. So each one of those represents a form group. A form group is something that holds a label and an input type. So I'm going to assign form group to be able to style that grouping. And then I'm going to give a margin, a bottom margin of 3. And actually, let me remove the margins for now so we can see what would happen. And then we'll add those back in. I always like to see what happens as we move or add elements. Okay, so we'll start with that by just applying the form group to each of these. So now if I refresh, make sure class, save. I should class form group. Oh, I need to actually also update the form control as well to be able to get that. Otherwise, my inputs won't be styled. So here for that input, form control. Okay, perfect. So for each of the divs, I have to give it a form group because it contains a label and an input type. But then I also have to apply a class name with form control because that's the actual thing that's then going to get rendered. Let's see how that's going to look. Ah, that's much better. Yeah, looks much, much sharper. Now, let's go ahead and now I might not like how close these are to one another, right? Because as soon as one ends, the next one renders. So that's why I might then go into each one of these divs and do, oh, let's do a margin bottom MB of 3. And you can always, when you style, it's very much like an artistic process. You look at it, you decide if you're happy with it, and then you can decide whether you want to move things or not. Okay, so, oh yeah, I like that spacing much better. Excellent. And
Professor, there's also one other one that pushes it from against the wall.
Oh yeah, I think I skipped, yeah, having to actually add a container to everything, right? So let's go into our so again, one thing we should always do with Bootstrap is make sure that this div here is a container. Let's see what happens when we actually apply container. And so instead of viewing everything rendered in this way, as soon as it's been containerized, it gives us those margins. And it looks so much more professional. And then what I can also do here was, what was this margin to the, was it to the top by 4? I don't remember. Let me see. Let me go look at my notes. Margin to the top. Yeah. So what I'm doing here is right now I'm still rendering everything at the very top of the viewport. So if I apply a top margin of 4, it's going to push all of my content down. So now I get a little bit of spacing there too. Excellent. Okay, so now I've applied my margins here. I've applied my stylings to my input groups. Very nice. Why don't we go ahead and actually adjust the text on our heading element as well. There we go. And so that's going to use that display -1. So what that's going to, instead of using this thicker font, it's going to use like a thinner font that's bigger, much nicer. So it really stands out. Okay, so let's see. So we have a background, right? We've changed the color to light. We've containerized all of our elements. We gave a top margin of 4. We changed the text of our heading element to use the display type. We've updated the styles of our inputs. And so let's also style our button as well. So right now our button is still the default ugly button, right? So let's go into our button and add some classes here. Again, we're going to use the BTN so that we get the button style, but then we're going to make our button primary. So primary is an action color term for blue. And actually, let's not do float end yet. Let's see what happens if we just do this. So if I do that, all of a sudden we get a nice styled looking button. Now, suppose I want the button to be on the right-hand side instead of the left-hand side. Then I can apply this other term. It's called float-end, and it will float the button to the right-hand side on the end side. Perfect. And again, this is completely responsive, so I can stretch it like in portrait mode. I can stretch it to be landscape mode, and it's going to look nice. It's going to give us a responsive styling. Excellent. So I'm happy with that. Let's move on to define our projects page. So the first thing we need for a projects page is to create a projects page. So let me get back over here and do touch projects.html. Okay, perfect. And let's go here and let's start by focusing in on that and type in HTML. And HTML, perfect. I got my HTML tags in there. One thing, if you ever forget to put HTML tags, the browser will go in and insert them for you afterwards. So this is something that we put in because it's a good programming practice, but it's not actually required. Okay, now, just taking a quick view of the approach for our projects page. Now that we've designed it, we kind of want it to look like this. So we're going to have a heading element that says code, and then a horizontal tab, and then each of our projects we want to represent as its own little like card, where inside of the card we'll have an image of the project or something that depicts the project, then whatever the title of our project is underneath it, then some text that describes the project, and then maybe at the footer of this card we might have the technologies we use, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Java, whatever, and then a button that we can click to see more that might either link to the GitHub account where the source code is, or maybe links to where the project's deployed at if it's a web application. And again, since this is going to be responsive, we want it to our cards to line up horizontally or vertically if it's in portrait mode. So we do want to get that responsiveness to it. Okay, so now that we know what our goal is, why don't we start by defining the head element inside of our projects page. Okay, and again, we're just going to set the favicon. We're going to set the title to be your name, so that's consistent. We're going to set up this initial character sets and just have our viewport have an initial scale of 1, which are the default behaviors typically. And then we're just going to make sure that we link our CSS files, our Bootstrap files, so that we get all of those predefined class names so that we can style by just applying class names to our document. We don't have to write or alter any CSS by hand. So with that said, let's go ahead and grab the body. Now, none of this body applies any of the Bootstrap class names yet, so it's going to be all unstyled, but it should look similar to what we will have in our demo or in our prototype from the approach section. So here we'll have a nav bar, and then we'll have our div that will be our container. And so this div will go all the way down to here. That's going to contain our heading element, and then the horizontal rule, our heading element will say this is the code section. Then here I can read this comment and say, oh, this is going to be our card group. So from here all the way to here, right, where I end my card group will be my group of cards. So every card would go in between this div here. And then we're going to start a card at this div, and it goes all the way until we end this first card. And then inside this card, we would have a card header where we'll go ahead and give it an image. We'll have a card body, right, which will be this div, which will be our heading element, and then a paragraph about what's in the card. And then we'll have a card footer, which will have the technologies we use to build this, and then like a button to be able to see more. And then after I have this first card, if I wanted to build more cards, I could kind of copy and paste this and then update the card project title and the image and all that other stuff. Excellent. And actually, let's see what that looks like at this point. So let's go over here. Let me hit back. And let me click on code, which should bring me here. Perfect. So this is what it looks like now without any stylings. Yeah, that's exact. So now what we want to do is, why don't we set the background color to be blue? So to do that, let's do bg-primary on my body. So let's go over here. Let's go to the body tag and apply that blue. So here, if I, yeah, perfect, perfect. And then also let's go ahead and set our primary div to be our container. So let me go here, set that to be a container. So now when I re-render this, what you'll see is it's going to style everything inside, giving me this responsive spacing to the left and the right. And then also, why don't we go ahead and set our heading element to be consistent with our other pages, where we use the display-1, and then we'll do a margin to the top of 4 so that we, bam, just like that. Perfect. That looks great. And so that's what that looks like. And so, yeah, we are currently where we want to be at visually. So the next thing we want to do is, why don't we actually start using some Bootstrap stylings so that our cards start rendering properly. So let's start by grabbing this. So let's go into here. So this div that's supposed to represent a card, let's make that just a card. Okay. Perfect. So now we have just a card that's rendering for us. And now our card is made of 3 different constituent parts. It's made of a card header, a card body, and a card footer. So the div that represents my card header, let's go ahead and apply card header. The div that is my card body, let's give it the name card body, the class name card body. And that div that represents a card footer, let's give it the name card footer. So now let's take a look.
That's the wrong div.
Okay, so we have the head, we have the body, and we have the footer. It's looking good. Oh, no, what has just happened there? Okay. And so the last thing I want to do here is I want to apply a card group style for the collection that holds more than one card. So the idea is that right now I just have the one card, but as I hold more cards, this will allow my cards to be responsively styled so that it decides how many it can draw horizontally before it has to draw more, if it has to draw them all vertically. So it handles that logic. So now that shouldn't really do anything because we only have the one card. Perfect. So let's see. The next thing I want to do is why don't we affect like the text and the image and the spacing and stuff. Just get everything up. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Card footer. Oh, yeah. Ah, yes, that's what we want. We want it 3 discrete parts, right? A header, a body, and a footer. Much better. Thank you. Okay. So let's start by getting our text light. So at this point, if I go back to the body and I put text light, now it'll make my black text go white. And of course, that's not going to be great for the card, but it looks much better up here, I think. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is let's go and actually get our, what do we want to do here? Let's start with this one. Let's add to our card a background of dark, and we'll center the text. So we'll go into our card here. Okay, yeah, perfect. So now we can see the content. Now that it's all light, right? We'll set it to be dark and we'll center it. Perfect. The next thing we want to do is let's style the image so that it's using a thumbnail style. So right now, instead of rendering the full image, we want it to be responsive. So let's go to our image and give it the class of image-thumbnail. And let's see what effect that has. So when I go and hit refresh, bam. Going to give it a nice outline around it. Now let's go into our heading element here. And let's see, this is in our footer. So inside of our footer, we want to mute the text of the skills. So that's going to change it to be gray. Perfect. And then let's also do some things with the button. Let's make that button go blue. Well, let's take a look. So let's apply some styles to the button. So the button, we're going to use a Bootstrap style. We'll make it blue, and we're going to float it to the right. So now our button's going to look like that. Perfect. It's looking good. And then the last thing I want to do here is let's apply a gap of 2 between cards. So notice this is being applied in the card group. So it's letting me know how much spacing to put between more than one card. And so maybe what I need to do is add a card so we can see what that's going to start looking like. But let's see. So save that. And so let's go here. And yeah, so that doesn't really do anything. So we'll have to add another card just to see how that's going to affect everything. So here it says to test this, try copying the HTML code from card 1. And then we're going to make a card 2. So let's do that then. At this point, I'm going to take everything here, going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it right in here. Perfect. And actually, let me remove the gap 2 here so we can see what it looks like without that. Now I have 2 cards, and notice without the gap, it just draws one on top of the other. So let me add that gap 2 back, and what's going to happen is it's going to give me the ability to have some separation there. But now if I pull this out, you can see I have, make sure div, I'm missing a div here. So that's there. Oh, whoops, I don't want, let me grab this, not the perfect, not the card group. I just want to add everything for a singular card. So let me undo what I did. And okay, so starting with a card div, and then the card header, the card body, and the card footer. Not all my cards are supposed to go into the card group. Don't want to reproduce that. So let's refresh that. That's what I want. 2 cards that are equal sizes, right? And notice they're nice and responsive. Oh yeah, that looks slick. Okay, let's go to a blog page. So our blog page is going to be called blog.html. So let me make that. I'll start with making my HTML elements. Excellent. Okay, and then the first thing I'm going to do here is let's go ahead and define the head. And so this head is going to look exactly the same as the others. I'm not going to spend any time reading over it. We're importing all the same stuff. Let's get the initial HTML built out. So let me grab this, and I will go and define the body. So this body, and just looking at it, so let's look at our prototype here. The general notion of what our blog page is going to look like is we'll have a heading that says blog, and then a horizontal rule. Then we're going to use a carousel that's going to give us the controls to go left or right and show us how many different things are in this carousel. And then we'll have like this image that will represent what this blog post is about, and then put like a caption on top of the image that has like a blog post title and maybe a small summary, and then the ability to click on the See More button that will then link us to that article. Excellent. So now that we know what we're going for here, let's see what we initially have. When we define our body, we're going to have the nav bar that we'll eventually implement, but then we're going to have this div here that is actually going to predefine our container for us. And it's going to have margin T-4 to the top. Let's see here. Yeah. And so here, inside of this div, I'm going to create what's going to be my carousel body. So it's going to go from here to here. So this is my container. This will be my carousel. My carousel can have slides. So I'm going to define the first slide here. And I'm going to give an ID of slide -1. Then I'll create another slide here, right? With this div, I'll give an ID of slide -2. Each of these slides are going to have an image. Then I'll have a div with some HTML elements that's going to be what's rendered on top of that image, which is going to be the title of the blog post, a small summary paragraph, and then a button that has an on-click event that's going to change the location to be inside of our articles directory to be articles1.html, which is a pre-existing HTML file. And then we'll have another blog post that will bring us to the second. So if I were just to look at this really quick, let me go back. And from my landing page, let me click on blog. And so there I have my blog post. And it's got a red background because I've already started applying some of the Bootstrap terms, because we've seen this enough times where I'm not going to do individual steps for that. So BG danger is red, and then light text, and then we have this already in a container. And margin to the top with my blog post, and then this is going to be the carousel. So really the big thing about this next step is how do we wire up this carousel, start getting it to work. Right now, if we look at everything, and let me just make sure here, carousel div, yep. Am I missing? I got this div, yeah, that div, perfect, yeah, and that div, perfect, okay. So if I scroll down, yeah, those are my 2 slides right there. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to set up some data that will get a carousel to work. So let's go to here. And inside my carousel body, so here inside my carousel, my blog carousel, where is that? Oh, nope, not there. I want it right here. Okay, That's what I'm looking for. So right inside my carousel, on this div that has the ID of blog carousel, I'm going to apply these following classes, these attributes to it. I'm going to give it the class of carousel and slide. And now I can set, Bootstrap allows me to go ahead and set some data attributes that it manages for us. So I can have this data Bootstrap for ride, and then give it the label carousel, and then an interval time of 1,000, which is a millisecond. So it's going to be a second. So that goes fast. You can adjust that so it goes slower. Okay, so you still haven't affected anything yet. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is we need to actually start affecting these slides. Oh, and slide is the motion that's going to take. So it's going to slide from like left to right. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go into the slide one. So we're going to look for the ID tag of slide one here. And we're going to make this a carousel item. So just like a list has list items, right? A carousel can have carousel items. And we want to make the first one the active carousel items. That's where we're going to start. And then inside of there, since we want this div here to render on top, since we want this to render on top of the image, we're going to set this as our carousel caption. So that blog post one and that sentence in the button will render on top of our image. And then we're going to do all that same for our carousel slide number 2. So just like what we had here for slide 1, we will set slide 2 to be a carousel item, but it won't start as the active one. And then here, just like we have a caption for that first one, we want to set this div to be our carousel caption there. So let's take a look if I refresh. Okay. So now look, we have blog post 1, sentence describing topic for blog article 1, read more, perfect. And right now, the slide should transition every second. Oh, yep, and there it did. Perfect. Okay, let's see now. The next thing that I want to do is let's go ahead and get those carousel indicators implemented. So let me go to, let me find the ID of blog carousel. So inside of my blog carousel, here, I want to add in a ordered list that's going to have the class Carousel Indicators, and I'm going to do a set of list items. I'm going to have a set of list items for each slide that I have, and here I'm going to have an attribute data-bs-target, which is going to target our blog carousels. Remember the hashtag in front represents an ID, so the target for these list items are going to be for our carousel, the thing that has the ID of blog carousel. And so our slide order is going to be slide to 0, and then from there it'll be slide to 1. So these are our slide, and then this will be our active. So these bind, what these are going to do is going to bind the index ordering on the blog carousel of our slide numbers. So let's go ahead and refresh. So now notice, yep, that's where this is. See, so here's my indicator, 1, 2, 1, 2, and it knows which one to shift to because we've defined those attributes right here. And again, we set the active one to be the first one, and all the other ones would not have the active one there. And then let's go into the carousel body and actually go ahead and define the text to be centered and to make this the inner carousel so we can get some styling here because the styling is kind of off. So here now that'll allow us to go ahead and define the inner carousel where we can then apply centering to it. Now I can, if I want, manually toggle our carousel to bring us to one or the other. And then if I let it go, there we go, we'll slide every second. And of course we can adjust that number to be longer than a second if we wanted to. And then let's also go ahead and add some carousel controls. So to add my carousel controls, we're going to add this as well. Let's go to here. And so underneath, so after this div here, so that's my inner carousel. I want to add controls underneath that. Uh-oh, that's all over the place. There we go. And okay, perfect. So here will be my carousel controls. My carousel controls are essentially anchor tags. And I'm going to have a control that allows me to control the previous slide and one that will control to the next slide. I'm going to use a hyper reference that's, again, going to target the ID of blog-carousel. So the hyper reference of my anchor tag is actually targeting this ID, this actual HTML element of blog carousel. And it's essentially going to have a data attribute that's going to cause the carousels to slide to the previous state or to the next state. And then inside of this, I'm going to use an icon that's going to be an arrow backwards and an arrow forwards. Okay, so let me go here and see when I do a refresh here. Notice I have an arrow here and an arrow here that's now rendered. And when I click that arrow, it now brings me to the previous slide. And this brings me to the next slide. And again, all of this wiring is happening based off of these data attributes defined by Bootstrap and also these class names. So the stylings done by the class names, but the reason why we're able to get these interactive components that Bootstrap's evaluating using like data-bs-slide is coming from the JS file that we included, so that we can get like these really cool interactive elements. Oh yeah, and when I click that, it should bring me to blog post 2, and when I click that, it should bring me to blog post 1, which would presumably be an article. Excellent. Okay, for my fifth goal, now that I've gone ahead and created a blog page, is to actually create an about page. And I want the about page to look the nicest. I want to have this heading elements say about, and then I want to have a horizontal rule, and then I want to have like an image of me with some cool like icons and maybe what my education status is, and then my name in here and a description, another image of me. And then underneath that, I want to have a skills section that has like images of all the different skills I know to make it look as graphically pleasing and cool as possible. And then when you collapse this, I'm going to want to set it up in such a way that it expands my image that's on the left here to be bigger. It's going to show these little icons for contacting me. It will still show what my education is, and then it's going to show my name and my description and all my skills here, but then it will emit the second image of me. So I want to have this really responsive way of rendering this to be super pretty in both desktop and portrait mode. So first, let's start with an about page. And let's start with HTML. Okay, perfect. Save that. And then let's set up our head. And so that we've done this, 4 other times. So I'm not going to spend any more time explain what's happening there. Now here, let's go ahead and define our body. There we go. And then we'll take a quick look at what's happening in the body. So in the body, I'm going to make the background success, which is going to be green. I'm going to make the text go to light. I'm going to have a nav bar, which I'm going to implement in the next goal so that we actually get our nav bar installed. I'm going to have my div here, which is going to be my container. Inside of this container, I will go ahead and use the display. So be consistent with my about, and then, the icon of the person, have a top margin of 4, have a horizontal rule. Then after that, I'm going to have all of my about me, my grid and Flexbox stuff in Bootstrap. I'm going to implement here. Haven't done it yet. And then again, I need that script tag. So at this point, what I should have is, and let's go and take a look at this. That's about, I just have this. Perfect. So the next thing I want to do is, oh, wow, this is a lot. Let's actually go ahead and implement our grid. So here, I'm going to paste all of this. So what's happening here? Well, I'm going to have a column 1. So my column 1 is going back to my proxy would be here. It's going to have an image of me. It's going to have my social, my different ways of contacting me, like GitHub or maybe Twitter or Facebook or something, and then this description. So that's going to be column 1. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to center the text in there. It's going to have like my name. It'll have that image where I'm going to use a thumbnail, and I'm going to use a rounded circle, and I'm going to set the width to 50. Then I'm going to have a collection here, a div collection that's going to have a collection of hyper references, anchor tags that are going to have a Twitter icon, that'll have a LinkedIn icon, and it'll have a GitHub icon. Then I'll have a horizontal rule after that. Then I'm going to have a div that's going to be a collection of, first of all, a span tag, which will be my education, and then computer science, and then University of New Orleans. And then I'll do a horizontal rule after that. So that's going to be effectively what I want as my first column. For my second column, I'm going to make that one go dark, so it's distinguishably different. And then I'm going to have different rows in there. I'm going to have a row that's going to be my name, and then my a statement about myself, and then an image of me is also going to be in that row. So I can have columns in that row. And then I'm going to do a horizontal rule, and then I'm going to do skills as a heading, and then my skills will be collected in a group itself as a div tag, which will be a collection of various images of like Java and JavaScript and HTML and CSS and React and whatnot. So let me go over here and actually do a quick refresh. And yep, okay, so my name, that's an image of me, those media links, my education, and then this is going to be the next column, right, where it would be my name, a statement of purpose, the image that I want as part of that row. So this is supposed to be row 1, and this is supposed to be row 2 with my skills, and then all these images of skills that I've accrued. Okay. So then the next thing I want to do is let's go and actually let's start by applying some of these. So I'm going to go into inner fluid. Okay, so here I want to define this as a row in the About Me section. Container fluid text, and then column 1, social links. Yep. Okay. And so inside of here, in column 1, I'm going to see where it's column 1 here. Inside of here, I want to set this to be a column that's going to take up 2 slots. So on Bootstrap, whenever I have a row can be discretized into 12 column spaces on a horizontal size of medium display or larger. So unless I'm on a phone, it'll ignore this rule unless I'm on something that meets whatever the medium requirement is. So you can look at the resolution of that. But ultimately on a phone, we're not going to columnize this. We'll essentially expand everything out. So we'll only set this column to be 2 slots on displays that are medium or larger. And here, let me go over here on our column 2. And in column 2, let me set that to be a column. Only on medium purposes, though, to be 10. So 10 plus 2 is 12. So let me see what happens with that. So I have a row that has 2 columns. And there it is, right? So on medium view, this is my smaller column, and now this is my larger one. This is 10 units by 2 units. But as soon as I collapse this down, right, once it's no longer medium, then it ignores that rule to make it a column of 2 and 10, and it puts it each on its own row. So that's what the MD does. Once it's smaller than a medium size resolution. Okay. Okay, so then let's go here, and I did that. So let's see what happens when we apply these styles here to under our portfolio circle. So here on this div. So this div, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Flexbox. Remember, a Flexbox allows me to line things up. So right now, this is what I want to go ahead and use a Flexbox for. And here I'm going to justify the content to the center. I want to put a gap of 4 between those and a margin on all sides of 4. So what that's going to allow me to do is when I look at this, it's going to allow me to do that. I'm able to flex these spaces out to essentially put a gap between them and then to put margins around them, make it just look a little bit more professional. And again, it allows me to justify the content of the center. So the Flexbox allows me to talk about the alignment of these images inside this space. Excellent. Okay, so now let's go into our education section and actually do something similar there. So here, I want to go ahead and also use a Flexbox, but I want to do it based off of rows and do a row columns of 1. So here, what that's going to do is, yeah, there we go. See, and so now, instead of all this overflowing, it's actually going to, it should set that in such a way that we can then control that. Let's see, class, deflex rows columns 1. And that's my span, perfect. And then once I do that, I have that. And then one last thing I want to do here is inside of my skills section on my skills. So here, this thing holding my skills, I also want to apply a flex to that. I want to flex it based off of rows, but I want to have it based off of 5 columns. So for each row, it will have 5 columns. Let's refresh that. And yep, there we go. So here, we're using the flex to order the elements. So now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. Oh no, I didn't want to do that. And refresh. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay. And then the last thing I want to do here is I want to go ahead and on my column, I want to set this up so I can go ahead and have nested rows and columns. So I can nest those. So inside of here where I have the column that's of size 10, I can actually make this itself a row. And now that that's a row, it can have multiple columns. Let's go ahead and do the following. I want 2 different columns inside here. One that has my name. And if it's a medium size viewport, then I want to consume 8 spaces. Otherwise, if it's small or extra small, I want it to consume 12. I want it to be the entire slot. And on the second row, the second column, so here on this second column here, I want it to be on a medium size 4. So again, 8 plus 4 is 12. That's how many columns I have in any given row. So this will take up 4 of my slots versus 8 of my slots. However, if it's smaller than if it's smaller than 4, I'm sorry, medium. If it's smaller than medium, so if it's smaller, extra small, I want to display nothing. So D-none will be a display of nothing. If it's medium or larger, then I want to display it as a block element. So D allows me to set the display mode. MD allows me to say what size is the viewport for this action to occur. Block will allow me to make this a block element and actually render the image. If it's small or extra small, it will ignore it. So what that's going to allow me to do is when I click on this, now all of a sudden I have this nested row that has 2 columns where I have an image on one and my name and the text on the other. And if it's small, then the display of that image goes to none and it disappears. And then this goes to 12, so it consumes the entire space. So now I have this really cool about page that allows me to have like 2 columns unless it's on a mobile phone. And so it looks beautiful in in landscape mode. It looks beautiful in a portrait mode. And so I just want to finish this lab out. So for any reason you can't stay a little bit longer, I will record this and make it available. But there's only one step left in this lab, and that's to set up the nav bar. So I want to go ahead and do that before I leave for today, so that we have this all in one video. So the last and final goal is to set up a navigation bar using Bootstrap. And so here, what we'll do is we'll go in the nav bar in all of the pages that we've had, so projects, blog, about, and contact, and we'll actually go ahead and implement the contents of the nav bar there. So let me go to each of those. So let me go to contact, for instance, and where I had a nav bar, I will actually now implement. So here I will use the class names nav bar so that it gets a nav bar implementation. And then the color of the nav bar, I want it to be light. And then I want the background color to be light, and I want it to be set up as a fluid container. So again, our nav bar is its own container. A fluid container will go all the way to the ends without the spacing on the horizontal right and left. Then inside, I'm going to create an anchor tag that's going to have the navbar brand. That's going to give us the icon, the hamburger icon we want, and it's going to hyper reference to index.html, which is our base page. And then we'll have this look like a house. So let's see what this looks like. And actually, let me go ahead and what page? This is the contact page. So let me go to the contact page. So we'll go to the contact page. So now here you see, this is a nav bar that goes all the way across the top. And then I have this thing that looks like a house and says our nav bar. When I click on it, it brings me there. Okay. Now, the next thing I want is to also have some options in my nav bar. So let's go ahead and inside of our nav bar, we're going to create an unordered list that's going to have all the options of where we can navigate to. So I have a list item that will have a hyperlink that goes to projects. And then we'll have a list item that will have a hyperlink that will go to the blog page. We'll have a list item with a hyperlink and anchor tag that goes to about, and a list item with an anchor tag that goes to contact. And for each one of those, I'll have an icon that represents the envelope, and then I'll have the term contact. And then this is the icon of a person, and this is going to say about. This is going to have the icon of chat dots, and that'll say blog. This will have an icon that renders our coding icon, and that'll say code. And I'm going to apply some class names. So since we're inside of the nav bar container here, I'm going to say this is actually my nav bar navigation. So nav. And then each one of these list items inside of my unordered list, I will classify as a nav item so that it renders appropriately. So let's see what that's going to look like when I go back over here. And there we go. So now my nav bar actually contains these nav bar items that I can now navigate to. Blog, perfect. About, perfect. And then contact, which is what I'm already on. Okay. And then the next thing that I want to do is I actually want to make my nav bar collapsible. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to nest that unordered list that's currently, so I want this to collapse so that I only see it when I click a button. So I'm going to go to where this unordered list is defined at. I'm going to tab it over and I'm going to put a div. I'm going to wrap it into a div class, and I'm going to give it the class names of collapse. So it's collapsible, and then nav bar collapse. So this is a description. So this starts it in a collapse state, and this gives it the ability to be a nav bar collapsible item. And I'm going to give it just an ID so I can target it with nav bar options. And then above that, I'm going to put a hamburger button. So let me grab that. So above this, I'm going to create a button that interfaces with it. So this is going to be my Navbar Toggler. And again, I'm going to be able to create a toggle attribute, a data toggle attribute that's controlled by the JavaScript that's going to have a collapse action. And the target is going to be to target the HTML element that has the ID Navbar option. So it's going to be this div here that I can target. And then what it's going to render inside here is going to be the icon of a Navbar Toggler icon, which is commonly referred to as a hamburger icon. There we go. So if I toggle that, now notice I can hide and display it. So it only shows me my options when I toggle it, and then it'll untoggle it. Perfect. And now in order for this to work on all my pages, I will now take my Navbar code, I will copy it, and I will paste it into my projects HTML page. So I'll save that, and I'll go into my blog page. I'll find the empty Navbar. Nope, yeah. Did I have? Yeah, here it is. Paste that there. And I'll go to my about page, find the empty Navbar. Here it is, and paste that there. Save that. And now let me take a look here. So now if I click on this, I should be able to go to code. Yep. I should be able to go to blog. Yep. I should be able to go to about. Yep. And I should be able to go to contact. Yep. And then at any time, I should be able to click on this, and it brings me back to the main page. And now I have a pretty responsive, and I should be able to see what all this stuff looks like in a portrait mode. Looks great, looks great, looks great, and looks great. Excellent. And just like that, that's how easy it is to create a responsive, professional-looking web page without having to write any of your own CSS using Bootstrap and just class names in your HTML document. So that is that's going to be Lab 3 for Bootstrap. If you haven't watched the lecture and taken the quiz, please do that. But this will lead us to also the ability for you to do your next homework, which is going to which I'll go ahead and publish on Moodle. But what it will be is for you to actually design using Bootstrap and CSS your very own portfolio page that would have all these own sections. And your challenge is to make a page that looks better than the page that we just designed today. Something that is represents you and your brand for you to be able to sell yourself and your talents to the general public that you can put and use on your resume. And so as we start to share projects, I would like for you to maintain and update your portfolio page as the semester goes along and add things like blog article post about the projects you've worked on, add the projects you work on, and generally just bring this up to date so that you can use it after you're done with this class. Excellent. Is there any questions? Well, yeah, yeah. Did I say GitLab? I meant GitHub. Excellent. Well, if you have any issues, just go ahead and send me a question on Discord. But other than that, everyone have a great day.